Part 1. The Foundation of Sand. Arthur Vance viewed the world through the lens of an architect. He understood load-bearing walls, the stress points of steel, and the delicate balance required to keep a towering structure from collapsing under its own weight. For the past 7 years, he had applied these same principles to his marriage with Clara. He absorbed the stress, reinforced her insecurities with his patience, and served as the quiet, steady foundation upon which she built her sparkling, socialite persona. But every foundation has a breaking point. The fracture occurred on a humid evening in late May, at the annual Kensington Heights charity dinner. The ballroom was a sea of crystal chandeliers, tailored tuxedos, and silk gowns. Arthur stood near the bar, nursing a bourbon, watching his wife hold court. Clara was undeniably magnetic. Dressed in a striking emerald gown, she possessed a quick wit and a sharp tongue that drew people in like moths to a flame. Arthur's chest tightened as he saw the familiar glint in her eyes. It was the look she got right before she delivered a punchline. And lately, Arthur was always the punchline. "Oh, you think your husband is forgetful?" Clara's voice carried over the low hum of a jazz quartet, intentionally loud enough to draw the attention of the surrounding tables, including Arthur's senior partners at the firm. "Let me tell you about my Arthur. The man can design a skyscraper, but he can't navigate a simple dinner party." Laughter bubbled up from her audience. Arthur took a slow breath, forcing a tight, polite smile. "Let it go," he told himself. "It's just her way of entertaining." "Last week," Clara continued, her voice dripping with theatrical exasperation, "he actually tried to fix the plumbing in the guest bathroom. The great architect. He ended up flooding the entire second floor. I had to call a real man in the middle of the night to bail us out while Arthur just stood there, paralyzed, holding a wrench like it was an alien artifact. I swear, it's like being married to a giant, helpless toddler." The crowd erupted. It wasn't just a chuckle, it was full-bellied, raucous laughter. Arthur saw his firm's senior partner, a man whose respect he desperately craved, wiping a tear of mirth from his eye. The story was a complete fabrication. A pipe had burst due to a faulty valve, and Arthur had spent 3 hours in freezing water shutting off the main and minimizing the damage, while Clara slept through it at a hotel. But the truth didn't matter. What mattered was the narrative. Clara looked directly at Arthur, a smug, triumphant smirk playing on her lips. She wasn't just making a joke, she was asserting dominance. She was publicly castrating his competence to elevate herself. Something fundamental inside Arthur shifted. The invisible load-bearing beam of his patience snapped. He didn't yell. He didn't storm out. He simply set his half-empty glass on the mahogany bar, turned on his heel, and walked out into the cool night air. He didn't know it yet, but the demolition had just begun. Part 2. The blueprint for ruin. The ride home was suffocatingly silent. When Clara finally stepped into their penthouse, kicking off her heels, she sighed. "Oh, don't give me that sullen look, Arthur. It was just a joke. Everyone thought it was hilarious. You need to stop being so deeply insecure." "A joke," Arthur repeated, his voice dangerously even. "You lied to my colleagues to make me look incompetent. I made you look human," she snapped, pouring herself a glass of wine. "Lord knows you're boring enough as it is. Someone has to bring some personality to this marriage." Arthur looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the rotting wood behind the fresh paint. He realized that this wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern of emotional abuse designed to keep him off balance and subservient. He had spent years trying to fix a house that was built on a toxic swamp. "You don't renovate a condemned building," his architectural instincts whispered. "You tear it down." The drastic steps Arthur decided to take were not born of fiery rage, but of cold, calculating logic. He would not scream, he would not hit her, and he would not stoop to her level of petty public insults. He would dismantle the life she had built on his back, brick by brick. The next morning, Arthur called in sick to the firm for the first time in a decade. He went into his home office, locked the door, and began to dig. Clara managed their finances, an arrangement she had insisted upon early in their marriage, claiming it bored him. Arthur had happily handed over the reins, trusting her implicitly. He logged into their joint accounts, cross-referencing statements with the ledgers of the charitable foundation they co-chaired, the very foundation, hosting the gala where she had humiliated him. What he found over the next 48 hours chilled him to the bone. Clara wasn't just cruel, she was a criminal. Over the last 3 years, she had systematically siphoned over $200,000 from the charity's operational fund, funneling it through a labyrinth of shell LLCs disguised as event planning vendors. The money had financed her emerald gowns, her lavish spa retreats, and the lifestyle she used to buy her adoring audience. Furthermore, he discovered a string of email receipts for a boutique hotel across town. The rooms were booked under her name, consistently on Tuesday afternoons. Arthur felt a brief, hollow ache of betrayal, but it was quickly consumed by an icy, absolute resolve. His character was no longer that of the passive, enduring victim. He had become the architect of his own liberation. He hired Marcus Thorne, a forensic accountant known for being as ruthless as he was discreet, and Eleanor Vance, no relation, the most feared divorce attorney in the state. For 3 months, Arthur played his part perfectly. He smiled at dinner parties. He let Clara make her little jokes. He endured the public belittlement, knowing that every insult she threw at him was another nail in her own coffin. He was waiting for the right moment. He was waiting for the winter solstice gala. Part 3. The Demolition. The winter solstice gala was the crown jewel of Clara's social calendar. As the chairwoman of the foundation, it was her night to shine. 700 of the city's elite were gathered in the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel. Clara, wearing a custom-made silver dress paid for by the very people in the room, was glowing. Arthur sat at the head table, his posture perfect, his expression unreadable. He tapped his phone beneath the tablecloth, sending a single text to Marcus Thorne: execute. As dinner concluded, the lights dimmed. Clara practically floated to the stage, taking the microphone to thunderous applause. Behind her, a massive projector screen dropped down, displaying the foundation's logo. Thank you all, Clara purred into the microphone. Tonight is about giving. It is about selflessness. It is about looking past our own needs to help those who have nothing. She paused, her eyes finding Arthur in the front row. The familiar, cruel smirk appeared. Of course, some of us need more help than others. Just ask my husband, Arthur, who recently tried to do our taxes and ended up filing us as a charitable organization. A polite ripple of laughter moved through the room. Arthur stood up. He didn't storm the stage. He walked up the side steps with the measured, confident stride of a man who owned the building. Clara's smile faltered slightly as he approached her. Arthur, what are you doing? She hissed under her breath, covering the microphone. Sit down. I think it's time I contributed to the presentation. Clara, Arthur said, his voice loud enough to be picked up by the mic. He pulled a small remote from his tuxedo pocket and clicked it. The foundation logo on the massive screen behind them vanished. In its place appeared a highly detailed, color-coded spreadsheet. The room fell into a confused silence. Clara is absolutely right, Arthur spoke into the microphone, his voice echoing through the cavernous ballroom. It was calm, steady, and devoid of anger. Tonight is about looking past our own needs. It's a shame my wife struggles so deeply with that concept. Arthur, stop this immediately, Clara demanded, her face flushing crimson. She reached for the remote, but Arthur smoothly stepped out of her reach. What you are looking at, Arthur addressed the sea of faces, is a forensic audit of the Foundation's operational accounts over the last 36 months. You'll notice the highlighted columns. These represent payments to Apex Event Solutions and Crestview Catering companies that do not exist. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Clara's face drained of color. He's having a breakdown, she stammered to the audience, her voice trembling. Security, please. Arthur clicked the remote again. The screen changed to official state registry documents, proving Clara was the sole proprietor of the shell companies. He clicked again. Bank statements appeared, tracing the Foundation's money directly into Clara's private offshore account. Over $240,000 meant for the city's underprivileged children has instead funded my wife's wardrobe, her vacations, and her Tuesday afternoon hotel rendezvous at the St. Regis, Arthur stated, his voice ringing with the clarity of a struck bell. He clicked the remote one final time, displaying a collage of the hotel receipts and undeniable photographic evidence gathered by a private investigator. The silence in the ballroom was absolute, deafening, and heavier than lead. The elite members of society, the people Clara had so desperately tried to impress by tearing Arthur down, stared at her with open disgust. Clara stood frozen, her silver dress suddenly looking cheap under the harsh glare of the projector. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The illusion was shattered. The Foundation had collapsed. Arthur turned to look at her one last time. He felt no pity, only the deep satisfaction of a job perfectly executed. I have already forwarded these documents to the State Attorney General's office, as well as the IRS, Arthur said, his voice dropping to a conversational volume, yet carrying perfectly through the silent room. He reached into his breast pocket, pulled out a thick manila envelope, and handed it to her. And these are divorce papers. You'll find I've already frozen our assets. He stepped away from the microphone, walked down the stairs, and made his way toward the exit. The crowd parted for him like the Red Sea, their eyes wide with shock and newfound respect. He didn't look back as the sounds of shouting and panicked whispers erupted behind him. Part 4, the final inspection 1 year later. Arthur Vance sat at his drafting table in his new, sunlit office in downtown Seattle. He was 1,000 miles away from the toxic social circles of his past. He ran his own boutique architectural firm now, specializing in restoring historical buildings, taking things that were broken and making them strong again. He took a sip of his coffee and glanced at the morning paper on his desk. A small article on the third page caught his eye. Former socialite Clara Vance sentenced to 3 years for embezzlement. The article detailed her spectacular fall from grace, noting that her former friends had completely abandoned her during the trial, and she was left bankrupt from legal fees and IRS penalties. Justice, Arthur mused, was much like architecture. It took time, meticulous planning, and an unwavering commitment to structural integrity. But when built correctly, it stood the test of time. He felt a profound sense of peace. The anxious, quiet man who had allowed himself to be the butt of a cruel woman's jokes no longer existed. In his place was a man who knew his own worth, who set boundaries of steel, and who refused to apologize for his own quiet strength. Arthur smiled, a genuine, relaxed expression that reached his eyes. He picked up his pencil, turned his attention back to the blueprints of a beautiful, towering new structure, and began to draw. The foundation was finally solid.